Roberts recently posted a word wall that no one is going to read, so I thought I'd bring some attention to it and share my 2 cents. In his post, he argues that Politics and War was dominated by dictatorships, but over the past few years, the big alliances have switched to having multiple leaders. In other words, we have oligarchies. Yay! Now, he also suggested this was part of a trend, and that over time we might see more democracy. This is an interesting argument, but I kinda disagree with it. I'll explain why in a moment, but first let's address the elephant in the room. What is an alliance? Now that might seem like a stupid question, with an obvious answer, but hear me out. Some people say they're like companies. Members invest their time and taxes into the alliance, and in exchange they get access to favorable loans and entertaining content. This isn't wrong, but it feels inadequate. Investing a lot into an alliance does not mean you get to run it, and lots of angry whales can attest to that. Some smaller alliances describe themselves as armies. This makes sense for alliances like Oblivion, where people follow orders and move from objective to objective. However, I think most alliances are too lax or uncertain for this to be applicable. Now, I often describe my alliance as a team, but that's not accurate either. Teams take everyone's opinion into account, and to be frank, very few alliances do this. It's not just because they're elitist, though that can be the case. It's because so much information is secret, the members can't really offer informed advice to the leaders. Lots of players describe alliances as countries or states. On the face of it, this makes sense. They're composed of nations or citizens, they have a government, and only alliances have international personality, i.e. only alliances can sign treaties. Unfortunately, this doesn't tell us much about the alliance's internal organization though, and alliances aren't analogous to even the smallest real-world bureaucracy. So I would propose that alliances are most analogous to political parties. They're led by celebrities with big personalities and visions that people believe in. For most of the year, people put a sign in their yard and continue with their lives, but every once in a while they'll be called to attend a big event and compete against other parties. You can probably tell by now that I don't have a definitive answer for what an alliance is. Everyone has their own opinion, even if they don't realize it. Funnily enough, despite disagreeing on what an alliance is, there is still a lot of consensus on how an alliance should act, and that brings us to another question. Who owns the alliance? Is it owned by the person who created it, or is it meant to represent its membership? If an alliance is like a company, an army, or a state, then leaders could justifiably say they own it. Hell, they could even sell it. However, this is repulsive to most people, and if pressed, they'll argue it belongs to the majority of the membership. This is a remarkably democratic intuition, and it completely contradicts the meta and the systems people have been building for 2 decades. So if players don't really want dictatorships and they denounce alliances that ignore their members, then why were there so many dictatorships? Thankfully, this has a definitive answer. The big alliances have been trying to discourage their allies becoming democracies for so long that a consensus has developed. I can only imagine the progress we would make if they discouraged dog piles. Anyway, dictatorships have several advantages over democracies in Politics and War. I'll list what they are as well as the cons, since there is a reason alliances are becoming oligarchies instead. The pros of dictatorship are that they don't leak, they're easy to negotiate with, they're quick, they're less susceptible to sabotage, and they're better at long-term planning. The first 3 advantages are because dictators don't tend to share information, and they can make decisions by themselves. The final 2 advantages are because dictators can remove difficult people at their discretion, and the rest can't question orders or change the agenda. The cons of dictatorship are that they're less active, it's difficult to retain ambitious and skilled members, they're likely to stagnate as the leader gets older, and they find it difficult to rebuild diplomatic relationships because of grudges. The last and most important con is that they have a finite amount of free time, and this will vary based on the year and the season. This is one of the reasons dictatorships are becoming oligarchies. The big alliances are too large, and their leaders are too old for there to be only one. For some of these leaders, Politics and War is essentially a part-time job. Beyond the pros and cons, there's also a structural reason for why there were so many dictatorships. Alliances like to work with alliances that have governments similar to their own. They understand each other better, and that makes them more predictable, which is extremely important in diplomacy. This means that when the game is populated by dictatorships, they will think less of democracies and target them because they think they're weak. Inversely, when democracies are more common, they denounce the dictatorships and work against them, but to a much lesser degree, in my limited experience. From everything I've said so far, you probably think I agree with Roberts, and well, I do. I kinda agree with him. Official dictatorships were more common in the past than they are now. However, I don't think there is a trend towards democracy, and I don't think modern alliances listen to members more than they did in the past. Let me break down why I think that. I believe alliances have always been run by stakeholders. These are people that the alliance needs to function at its full potential. They could be members with lots of money in the bank, skilled fighters, mentors, or just people with lots of friends who might destabilize the alliance by leaving. All of these people have influence over the leadership because if their interests aren't served, they'll leave. In the past, when alliances were smaller and competition was more fierce, then these stakeholders would work together to lobby their leadership for change. Whether the alliance was a dictatorship or a democracy, they heard what their members had to say. Nowadays, the number of stakeholders has grown, but their individual influence and ability to cooperate has diminished. The big alliances are run by bureaucracy and legacy, and not layers of social circles. The fact new alliances aren't competitive worsens this, because it means that stakeholders can't go out on their own. If they want to leave, the only option is joining their former rivals, and that alienates them from their old friends and undermines any criticisms they had of their old alliance. So how do we solve this problem? It would be miserable to replace Robert's message of optimism with one of cynicism. I think increasing activity actually increases the spread of democracy, and stagnation depresses it. The more activity there is in this game, the more leaders will be expected to do, and the more they'll have to consult stakeholders. There's going to be a war in a week. Well, the leader has to convince people it's worth logging in. The leader performed badly in a war. Well, maybe someone else should be doing that. People are refusing to show up for the leader to claim victory? Well, maybe they deserve input on big decisions. If you want to spread democracy in politics and war, then do more stuff. However, if you're already doing that, there's a bunch of other stuff you can do too. Firstly, you could discuss politics in public and provide reasons for what you're doing. This would help foster the idea of legitimacy and give members something to talk about. If your members are engaged, then they're more likely to fight, but they're also more likely to second-guess your decisions. It's a gamble, because sometimes you'll be the bad guy, but in the long term, it'll grow the game and your alliance will be improved by the scrutiny. This would also give players a reason to join and leave alliances beyond wanting a better grant program. This is super important for smaller alliances, which might be more representative or innovative, but don't have the established wealth to provide cheaper loans. Secondly, pushing for game mechanics or political norms that slow down wars. Currently, wars are decided in the first 36 hours, and they're organized months in advance, so everyone knows what the conclusion will be before it's fought. If that was extended to 72 hours, and alliances waited to decide if they would fight, then secrecy wouldn't be as important, and more people might be involved. Finally, cultivating channels of communication between people wanting to form new alliances and improving catch-up mechanics will create more competition that will weaken stagnant alliances and shift power to those offering more representation. It shouldn't be cool for an alliance leader to treat their members like sheep, even if that's how the game works right now. Naturally, this video is rooted in Politics and War's very peculiar community, and it should not inform your opinions on real government systems. I try to approach this topic pragmatically because I do think increasing political participation is the best way to grow the game. There is a hunger to create, share, and hear stories in this community. People don't just want to log in once every few days so that in 10 years they will have 3 more cities than a bunch of other players doing the same thing. So I invite you to go and do something. Launch a raid, take a loan, sign a treaty or cancel one, roll the micros biting at your heels, and show the rank 1 alliance they can't push you around.